got Aang on the line right here. What do you want to ask?
How do you handle like dealing with like problem tenants?
I think if you see a problem tenant, you really want to make sure you find out the root cause of the tenant. A lot of times the root cause is because you had so many discounts on your rent. When you discount rent and you're desperate for tenants and you take anybody, don't lower your standards. Retention starts at acquisition. Retain good tenants. You save that leasing fee, you save that turnover time, that vacancy, the marketing fees and all that stuff. When you're chasing just occupancy, you're chasing just, I need someone to move in, so I'm going to give somebody 2 months rent free. That's unfortunate, but then potentially they might not be the greatest tenant to continue being renters.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Four Oaks Capital. Very excited for today's show. We've got two amazing people on the line with us. We've got someone who's an expert in this industry, Taing, and someone who's up and coming, Claudia Becerril, Clas. And first of all, we're going to bring on Aang, and just for anybody listening, we're going to put their bios in the show notes, so check those out if you have a second. But that said, Aang, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Appreciate you. And this is always a lot of fun. Always get to meet new people and learn more about other ways of doing things. So that said, Aang, go ahead and lead us off by telling us about yourself.
Happy to. First, meeting new people is one of the funnest parts of this. I actually think this industry I've been in many industries, one of the friendliest. There's lots of people who want to help each other out. It's not like zero-sum game. There's so much opportunity out there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Partnerships is key, and just you never know. It's a small road, right? So my background, I have been a real estate investor for 12 years, but I want to go a little bit back into personally. I was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. My parents are Cambodian, and that was very dark time in history in terms of the Khmer Rouge and genocide there. And I remember, I don't remember, but my parents told me of times where essentially we were hiding in the jungle and had to evade the soldiers. I was lucky enough to be a refugee in America, come here when I was 3. I'm lucky enough to have grown up in America, lucky enough to grown up poor, growing up hungry, and lucky to have all those situations, and not really feel like I was any of those things. And my parents worked 24/7, 7 days a week, like most immigrants' parents do, especially when they don't have any education. That was sort of my upbringing, and it gave me a really strong hunger and desire to have economic security. When you don't have economic security, you want to pursue it.
Yeah. I
was lucky enough to also be very good at math and very good at data and data patterns. And so like anyone in my shoes, I was day trading and playing poker and got into Wharton and for economics, into investment banking. That helped shape sort of my mathematical understanding of finding patterns and leveraging data to make informed economic decisions. And so those two things, in terms of the hunger, the background, and my abilities, helped me propel myself into financial freedom. And financial freedom for me has always been about having enough to provide for your family, to secure their security, and to have the freedom to do whatever you want. And I'll go into my projects and other real estate stuff, but when I first got my first apartment building, when I was age of 23, got unlucky because it was a financial crisis. I helped cause it, sorry. You book $4 billion of subprime assets. Yeah, they call it subprime for a reason. The net effect of that was it turned me off from really investing that much in stock market. I didn't like volatility. I like sort of the passivity as the regularness, the calmness of monthly checks. Maybe not calmness of tenants, but monthly checks. And also the prices went down by 2/3. So really good buying opportunity in 2008, 2009.
Real estate was on sale. So
Yeah, it was great. I should have bought more.
yeah, and I said the same thing. I bought as much as I could, which is one condo, and that was just down the road from where you're at right now. But if I were able to go back to that time, I would have bought up as much as I could. But can't.
Yeah, I actually bought 3 properties before I bought my first house. So those sort of I always say that try to make sure you can have your passive income streams before you focus a lot on yourself, because I think that help build that engine faster. But one of the things that really helped me was this passive income, getting $1,000 a month around there.
Mm-hmm.
And having that freedom to make better, or at least bolder decisions.
Mm-hmm.
After the financial crisis, a lot of my cohorts and friends went to MBA. I went to the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Peace Corps in the Republic of Georgia, making $200 a month, which didn't include housing. You had to get my own housing. And it's the toughest conversation I had with my parents, saying, hey, I'm going to go to this war-torn country, making almost nothing, where I was making a lot, now making nothing. And it's like, what are you doing? Like essentially the same situation as they had. And that was sort of one of the reasons. I was lucky to meet my wife there, but also lucky to have an income stream, not necessarily to use. I didn't actually use, I'm generally a very prodigious saver, but to just have that security. And going forward during my corporate career, where I switched jobs, I made moves, career-wise, I was in lots of different industries. I always saw real estate as sort of my side hustle, my thing that I really loved, but that gave me better decision making. I could go to my boss and ask for that raise. I could make a counter offer. I could make bold decisions because I wasn't afraid of getting fired or losing a job that was my entire income stream. Having just a little base layer gave me a lot more confidence to make bold decisions. That's how I was able to 5x my compensation in 10 right after going out of Peace Corps. So I want to highlight that too, because that's part of the motivation that I've always had, that this financial freedom to do whatever you want, and you can make dumb decisions and recover from them. You can make this, but you have the ability to make those decisions. And I think for me, that background of being hungry, trying to help my family out and achieving that. And then now the last corporate job was at Apple. I led data science on Siri. So if you're using Siri, it's not working very well.
Blame you.
Not working anymore. Sorry, Sammy.
All right. So you caused the financial crisis, and all Siri's problems are your fault too. So got it. I know who to call now. Great. But
in between, I worked at private equity and gaming, and I launched Apple Music and did a bunch of different things. So I was gonna say a lot of really cool things there. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like being born in a war-torn area. I didn't do Peace Corps. I served a mission for my church, which is very similar, except we don't get paid to do it. Is really the only difference. But I spent 2 years in South America, and I think I came back with that appreciation of the U.S. that you had as well, where you said you were very fortunate to grow up here. I didn't realize how fortunate I was until I was about 20 years old, and I left for 2 years and came back. But agree wholeheartedly. Definitely we're fortunate to be here. And incidentally, you mentioned your math ability. I got 2 degrees in math, and I kind of chuckled when you said that, because we were working on algorithms to beat video poker when we were in grad school, but never had enough money to really make it work out because of the minimum bets. But theoretically we could have beat video poker and made millions. But anyway, long story short. But so good on you, and I appreciate what you said about the security for income as well. If you have that extra stream of income, it gives you more options. I think you mentioned specifically, if you're tied to one job and you're so worried and you're clinging and you're worried about losing it, you don't have a lot of options. You're not going to be bold, like you said. You're not going to be able to go in and ask for that raise or the new position or promotion that you're looking for. So the extra income streams bring options, which I think is what everybody wants, is they want options.
But that said, you talked a lot about the reason you're doing it. But if I could get you just to narrow in on that one subject, what is your big burning why?
A big burning why has always been my family. And now that I run Tozy Capital, I feel like it's sort of a family business where I feel like my investors are my family. I have text messages of them giving me very grateful language and saying, I'm very thankful and all this stuff. I love that. I love sending distributions. I love doing all this stuff. But I bought my parents a house. I was able to give my family a lot of great things that they couldn't afford. And that's, for me, I've never really needed that much material wealth. I've never had it, so I've never needed it. I know I can live off $20 a month. Probably won't be as comfortable now. But it's something that I always wanted. And then when I had kids, I just had a second kid. I have a 7-month-old, almost 8. I think it gives me a lot of drive. And I think that's a big thing. I had these periods of time where I first got some success and my parents got into the middle class. And I kind of lost my reason why a little bit. I was so hungry to get them out of poverty. Then I met my wife, my future wife, and that gave me a lot of reason why. Then I had my first kid. Every one of these moments actually sort of drove me to be more ambitious, to do more, to strive for more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen the same thing. As my family grows, that there's more impetus on being more and more, successful, not for the personal accolades, but what it does for, your family and for your kids, the opportunities you can provide them that, you didn't grow up with. I grew up with, plenty that you didn't. I say this all the time. I thought I was poor, growing up. You had the opposite life where you really were poor and you didn't realize it. But, I kind of wish I could go back and, erase those feelings that I had because I wasn't. But end of the day, I think family is very, very tied to a lot of people's, whys. And do more for the people you love. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that for me, it's always been a feeling of gratefulness. And when you're grateful for what you have, when you're grateful for, you're not really jealous or envious of what you don't have, especially since you never experienced it. I don't know what having a regular Thanksgiving dinner looks like for a long time. When I first experienced it, that's cool. So I think I try to do that. It's hard now with my kids. I have a much bigger house. I have avocado trees, say mountains, and they're gonna be very spoiled, and I don't know how to not do it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but that's one of the parenting things is try to give your kids more than what you had without actually spoiling them. And my oldest daughter edits this podcast, so I'm not going to call any of my kids super spoiled right now because I'll get an angry phone call from her later. But that said, she wouldn't do that. No way. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about one of the deals you guys have done. Can you tell us a little bit about one of your projects?
Yeah, I would love to go into my first project, which is emblematic of sort of the next 5. And I was doing these basically every other year. And mind you, I was working 40, 50-hour job, a little more hours at the same time. I bought a triplex in the LA area. It was kind of run down. Bought it for $126,000, I believe, and put $35,000 cash down. I was lucky enough to make some money out of investment banking, and even though my portfolio went down half, so I had some money. I renovated it. I remember very clearly. And by the way, I was doing this living in DC as well. I was at DC at the time, buying in LA. My parents were in LA, so in my first many apartment buildings, real estate, and all my real estate now, essentially, it's not local to me. And that's actually been a very great learning experience to try to understand process. Yeah. Because if everything was local, I would just buy locally. And I've always lived somewhat in expensive areas where buying real estate is probably not the best economic decision to do so. So, so for me, I flew there, during some weekends to just paint, to redo the cabinets. Really learned that white is very easy, Navajo white, and spruces up. Got 3 tenants and had some turnover at that time. But one thing I did was get a really strong stream of income right away,
Mhm.
create more value from the multifamily, 3 units. You probably talk about this all the time, where you essentially get forced appreciation,
Yep.
and did a refinance within a year. I think it was like 8 to 9 months. Got basically all my money back from what I paid for it, and it was hooked. Did it
Yeah.
again the next year. Did it again next year. Which had
Now,
more
did
money to
you
start. But that's it.
did you keep on doing the three plexes, or did you start scaling up from there?
I did 3-plex, 4-plex, 3-plex, 4-plex, single family, 4-plex. So it didn't really scale up from there.
Okay.
This was sort of all I knew. I didn't even know what Burr was, and which is apparently what I did.
I mean, you can say that you invented Burr. I mean, go ahead. I mean, that's it, right? Yeah. I mean, I house hacked a couple of places before I knew what the term house hack meant. But yeah, sometimes you just figure it out.
Yeah, I think you just figure it out, and then if you see sort of, you just put it on a spreadsheet. That's what I did. Like I saw, I can put this much money in, can make this much money. That's better than a lot of my other options. And what I try to tell everybody now I talk to, and I have Zoom calls all the time, and investors or just people in general, know your options, know how to optimize your capital. That's finance 101. That's what investment bankers do. They try to move money around, low yielding things, maybe your bank account or your home mortgage that you're under leveraged, and you could get 3%, and move it to something where you could get more. Now, of course, you have to have the confidence to get that higher yield, that 10-12% yield, which I think back then was easy. It was like 20% yield on your money.
Yeah, cool. I think Claudia is smiling over there because she's closing on a 3-plex. Hopefully, what was it, next week?
Yes, it's going to be next Friday.
Okay, yeah. When you said 3-plex, I saw her face light up, and I'm like, okay, I know this is going to be perfect for her. But so, and one question for you: when did you make the leap from the small multifamily into the larger stuff?
When my time was worth more, and I realized that. When I needed to scale, when I was running to mortgage limit caps.
Right.
Yeah, and I think when you do residential loans, it's very different than commercial loans. It's actually easier to do commercial loans if you're doing professionals. And I think so. It was like 4 years ago. I started scaling up to bigger properties. I actually started to invest with other. I was very busy at the time, having job and first kid, not many, and I was an LP investor into other folks, and one thing I tried to do was always learn from them. So I tried to be an informed investor and understand what their process, be very annoying and nagging, but was fortunate to get a few folks who were receptive to them.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate that a lot. I think you dropped, a gigantic gold nugget right there. You said, when I realized my time was worth more, and I think that's what, a lot of people don't realize, or maybe they don't value their own time enough. But when you realize your time is worth more, it changes everything, but you spend a lot less time down in the minutia and a lot more time, that in different aspects of life. But I really appreciate that. So one question, and last question for you before we bring Claudia on. What's next for you?
So we've had a lot of success, and anyone doing this for the last 5 years is probably very successful. The market's been very good. So I can't claim all the success, but we paid all distributions during COVID too. So I was fortunate to be in great economic areas. We're about to close on 164 units in Atlanta. We got a few other apartments in the pipeline, closing past 1,000 units now. And I've also pivoted slightly into senior living. Senior living is a very strong asset where I love the cash flow. Thematically, what I try to do with my investment business is buy for cash flow. Have some kind of moat around that cash flow so that it's not as easy to get in. So that's why I kind of avoid where Claudia is buying, because it's a lot more people. But that's, when you don't have that much money, that's where you have to go. I usually stay within the juicy medium, 5 to 25 million. Above 50 million, you're facing these big institutional funds that have low cost of capital. They can overbid you, and I've been overbid by $5-10 million. I'm like, I was barely making money on this. Now they're like, how are they doing it? Because they cost capital so much cheaper. And then finally, we're growing, and I've strayed a little bit to other forms of investing. We have some debt products as well as Bitcoin mining is a big part of our portfolio now, and we're doing data centers to support that. So they're pretty good, cool stuff.
Nice. Sounds fascinating. Well, that said, we're going to shift gears and bring Claudia on the line. So Claudia, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. So start off same way. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm currently in Germany. My husband's stationed, he's an active duty army stationed in Germany. So we're here until he retires in 2 years. So in the process of actually when he got orders to come to Germany, it's when I separated from the army, when I finished my contract. I was served for 7 years. And when with the transition, it just kind of worked out really well, where I was gonna, trying to figure out what I was gonna do when I was gonna come in and come with him. And it's just real estate started to be a very, real possibility. And I wasn't gonna work. We have 2 small children, 4 and 6-year-old kids. And so we decided that I was gonna stay home kids. And at that point, I started thinking of, what was I gonna do with my time? And I started looking into real estate and reading about real estate, listening to Bigger Pockets, and just like being very intrigued by the possibilities. My background is in medicine. I'm a family medicine physician. So, I've been training for the past, before when, I was working for the military, I was heavily training, in medicine. And then I was working. And so real estate, I've always heard the benefits of real estate, but it never really was something that I thought I would be doing. And then when the opportunity came and I started learning more about it, it was so appealing, the entrepreneurship aspect of it, the opportunities, the multiple opportunities with real estate, that I really got interested in it. And the more reading I did, the more research I did and learning that it could be done long distance. Like I could do long distance real estate investing from overseas. And so I read David Green's book, Long Distance Real Estate Investing. That was such an eye opener and such a breakthrough for me. Like, this is doable. And so we moved during the pandemic. We got to Germany. We settled down, and then I took a real estate course just to teach you about the basics. Some criteria on what investing, and learning more about investing, learning how to build my team, how to approach it. And so starting January 1st, because I was January 2021, I'm going to start actively looking and putting offers in. And I did. I started, but with this market, it's been a crazy market.
It's tough for everybody.
And so we put several offers in. I had to walk away from 2 other properties, and finally now we're under contract for a 3-unit property, and we're actually closing next week. So that's been our real estate journey, and we're here.
Yeah, that's super exciting, and I was about 3 years away from my retirement date when I started putting a lot of effort into it. And something else that Taing said that I related to is military retirement, you get a pension. And I was able to look at that pension as the same security as Taing was looking at that, $1,000 a month. And that gave me a little more license to get more bold. I think prior to, when that military salary was like the only income for our family, I didn't want to mess that up, but once I get towards the end and I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I mean, your husband's going to have that same pension as I have, but that gave me just enough confidence to be able to go bold, to go big, and knowing that I had that to fall back on, and, come hell or high water, once I hit my 20-year mark, which incidentally, by the time this airs, I'll be fully retired. But I'm that close. I am that close. But anyway, knowing that I had that little safety blanket really helped me out a lot too. But so Claudia, what's your big burning why?
For me, it was mentioned before, family, my children. So we have a 4 and 6-year-old. I want to be able to have that freedom, financial freedom, to be able to attend their events, be there for them as they grow. I don't want to be tied to a job that's going to be very demanding and intense. And I think, and I know real estate offers that opportunity to be able to have more flexibility and be able to do more with it, right? So be able to if I do medicine part-time, then I can do real estate part-time and be able to just be able to build a legacy with real estate. And that entrepreneurship spirit of real estate, I love that about it. The networking, the possibilities, the diversity within real estate, so many opportunities within real estate. And like we have a single family home, we're under contract for a 3-unit property, and we want to keep on growing, and just I'm learning so much, and it's just so inspiring seeing people like Taing and what you've done. It's so inspiring. So thank you for doing this, and being open to answering my questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, without further ado, then, since we've got Taing on the line right here, what do you want to ask?
So I love your journey. I think, you have so many obstacles, and you've overcome so much. It's amazing. So I commend you for that. And I feel like as far as obstacles, going through real estate, there are benefits to it, but there are also the things that happen within real estate, like unexpected, or you have to walk away from a deal. And so, like, for you, how did you deal when you have to walk away from a deal after you invested time, effort, like even money, right? Because you spend money on the inspection, spend money on, different things. How do you cope with like the emotions afterwards when something doesn't work out and you have to walk away?
That's a great question. And I probably felt that a lot more personally in my first few deals when I was doing this all myself. I think when you're putting so much effort, right? You're birthing a baby, you're building a business. It's all very similar feeling. Yeah. And when you're going to close, you sign that contract, you get that tenant, it's like an amazing miracle feeling. But when it falls apart, when it's not because of you, because it's financing, it's because of financing, or because of the sellers, because of unforeseen things you found out about it. I've had a deal where it fell through because I had an issue with my credit that apparently I didn't know about, and I resolved it right after, but it's prevented me from getting that ability. And the seller said I gotta move out. Even I spent like a lot of time looking at this. It was a triplex as well. I regret it because like the market was going up a lot at that time. I was like, I could have got that. I was like, yeah. But I think when you go for me, and I love your story too. For me, when you go into sort of a business of real estate investing, not just real estate investing to to provide yourself passive income, you actually go to this process of you want deals to fall through if it's justified, and so it's more about scale. You go into it thinking that most of these aren't going to go through, right? In fact, if you go 1-for-1 and everything, then like maybe you're not putting that wide of a net on things. So I make offers on 5 things every week, and I negotiate on all things. I've been doing this for quite a while. The first iPhone is always very expensive to build. Prototypes very expensive. The millionth iPhone, very cheap. It's very good to use. And so when you get better at these things, and I love that you're going to do more of this. If you have the mindset of that, I'm going to do more of this, that this isn't my only deal. You have this abundance mindset. And so I talk about this all the time. When you don't think of it as like my only thing, it's like, I'm going to do more. I have the capacity to do more. Then you shift your mindset differently. That I learned a lot from that deal falling through. I learned a lot of not doing that again, or maybe that fell through for a good reason. The market, it might be on the top, in some markets. I know in San Diego, it feels like it. So you never know. I think you learn from all these things and you get better. You apply rule of thumbs when you make decisions, you make faster decisions, and you can do more decisions. And so that you can narrow down to that gem.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and maybe it's the analytical math side of me, but you just try not to get emotionally attached to deals. And on your first couple, it's extremely hard not to get emotionally attached. I mean, even with my heart of stone, just trying to get these deals to work, you get so excited about things. But really, you just have to step back and realize, am I getting emotionally attached to this, or am I making a business decision? And you got to try to make that business decision. We had an early deal fall through, and once again, not our fault. Property we got under contract was at a 90% occupancy when we got when we put the LOI in, it was at 90% occupancy. And we were trying to get a Freddie Mac loan, which requires 90% occupancy for 90 days.
Mhm.
And between the LOI and the end of the due diligence period, the occupancy fell to 75%. I mean, it was a 40 unit, they lost 6 tenants in 45 days, but it took us out of the deal. And, it felt terrible because, it's always nice to close. You want that next deal and you want the reputation of always closing, but at the same time, 90% to 75% is a big deal. And we walked away and it was, end of the day, it was a business decision. And that's what we kept on coming back to. It's a business decision.
Thank you. And my other question is, when working on a deal and you know that the tenants will potentially be a problem, like going into a deal, how do you handle like dealing with like problem tenants? Or do you have like confidence in cash for keys or negotiating with them or evicting them?
Yeah, great question. And if you live in California, invest in California, you probably face this all the time, which is why I don't invest in California anymore. But I used to, and I have a lot of experience with this specifically of, in California, when you're buying a triplex, for example, or anything, it's actually potentially more valuable when you don't have a tenant in it. It's actually interesting, right? Like, do you want a tenant? You want predictable cash flow? Do you want no tenant? I think when you have no tenant, you can have a clean slate. When you're buying, for example, when I was living in San Francisco or that area, houses that had no tenant, investment houses that had no tenant, and it went for 5 to 10% more because you had to pay $50,000 for today's rate, $50,000 to just get a tenant out. Because there's lots of restrictions with evictions and that stuff. I think one of the things that we do now is, I think, of course, when you're buying properties, especially apartment buildings at scale, you want a certain occupancy to get rent income. I think if you see a problem tenant, you really want to make sure that find out the root cause of the tenant. A lot of times the root cause is because you had so many discounts on your rent. When you discount rent and you're desperate for tenants and you take anybody, don't lower your standards. Retention starts at acquisition. When you retain good tenants, you save that leasing fee, you save that turnover time, that vacancy, the 1 month vacancy, 2 months, whatever it is, the marketing fees and all that stuff. But how do you do that? You have to keep your standards up for tenants, and you build formulas over time in your mind and how you do it. But yeah, when you're chasing just occupancy and chasing just, I need someone to move in, so I'm going to give somebody 2 months rent free, and they're the kind of person who needs that, and the economic conditions warrant it, and that's unfortunate. But then potentially, they might not be the greatest tenant to continue being renters, especially if you want to raise the rents.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he had a couple things, square on the head. First of all, it's where you invest. Bring that back. He says he doesn't invest in California because of the restrictions. We lean towards landlord-friendly states, and we make no excuses for doing it. We go to landlord-friendly states, or at least neutral states, so that at least the deck is stacked in your favor. And we have done cash for keys right now with the eviction moratorium. There's gray areas where you can still evict, and as of, I think it was last night, the CDC re-extended one more time the eviction moratorium. We have been able to go out to certain tenants who haven't paid, for several months, do cash for keys, and if some tenants are amenable to it. I think a lot of the tenants see the writing on the wall, and what a lot of people realize is they're racking up a lot of debt, and that debt's going to follow them once this eviction moratorium is over. Most of the landlords, most of the property managements and owners are going to send those people to collections, and it's going to eventually bite them. It's eventually going to hit their credit reports and everything else. And so I think that the cash for keys does work with the people who are reasonable and realize that eventually it's going to catch up to them, and helping them to see that kind of helps too. But Taing had pretty much laid it out. You take care of that when you put a tenant in, and if you find the right tenant, you don't have to worry about that on the backside. Now, inheriting tenants, that's a different story.
The screening, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
My last question is about, when you approaching upgrades or remodels at a property that you're obtaining, do you have a software that you use to estimate like repair costs, or do you have any advice on that?
Some of my recommendations would be every time you walk the property, bring a contractor with you, give them that incentive, and then they'll give you good cost estimate. And don't just bring one, bring several to have lots of walks to count. So that's and just keep those notes in your mind of understanding what the repair costs in that area, and then you can get a good average. I think basically going with the intention of that you're going to do it before you do it gives you hopefully gives you all the data points to make decision to do it, buy it, invest, whatever it is, to remodel, make decision to, do I want to change the carpet to vinyl floors? Do I want to replace these cabinets? Do I want to put exterior renovations? And all these things there's an NOI to it. There's return ROI to it, right? It's ultimately just a business. It's all these investments, tiny investments. And I really recommend to also put yourself out of it from an emotional personal decision. I think in some areas, it makes sense to really put yourself into it and think, I'm going to buy this and I want this to be a nice place and my taste is really good. And maybe that's in areas that have strong appreciation. I generally don't invest for appreciation, I invest for cash flow. When I invest for cash flow, I'm not necessarily wanting to live there. That wouldn't, at this point in my life, you can't think of it like, hey, would I want to live here? If you start putting that lens into it, you will overpay, you overbuild, you make things.
Yeah, and I think what he said there is absolutely key. When you walk a property, bring a contractor, and offer to pay them for their time too. I mean, it's part of the risk capital that you put in, but bring a contractor, offer to pay them an hourly fee to walk a property with you, and that way they're incentivized in a lot of ways. They could, if you purchase the property, they could get a job. But the other thing is just, we would talk with a lot of people coming up front. Me and one of my partners were both in mentorship programs. My other partners had informal mentors, but mentors nonetheless. And we would also talk with people who were doing the same thing in the same areas. Hey, what does it cost for flooring in this area? What does it cost for? So we did a lot of both, where we're just talking to other people. Hey, do you think 6,000 a door would buy us X, Y, and Z? And listening to what the responses were. But really, end of the day, the contractors are going to have the best information because they're the ones that are going to be doing the work. Anyway, that said, we're about out of time here. So one last question for both of you. Taing, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Please go to my website, Touzi Capital, TOUZI capital.com. Sign up. I love to do monthly educational webinars. These are all things that I sort of approach everything as I am very self-interested in learning how to not pay taxes legally and how to use bonus depreciation and how to invest in this and that, or how to get an SB-lock loan from your equity. All these random things I try to provide. I'm starting this website, Financial Freedom Decoded. It's not live now, but yeah, so I'd love to chat, even if you don't invest. I think educating yourself, learning is one of the most valuable things.
Awesome. And we'll put a link to the website in the show notes. So if you're interested in anything he has to offer, hit the show notes up and tap the link. Claudia, same question for you.
I'm in LinkedIn, Claudia Becerril Clas, Becerril Clas, and LinkedIn information. I don't have a website right now. My email is clascapitalinvesting@gmail.com.
All right. And we'll put links to your LinkedIn profile and to your email address in the show notes as well, so people can contact you. And incidentally, we didn't have a website until right around the time we closed on our first, big property. So, not having a website is not necessarily good or bad, but it took us a while to get that up too. But anyway, thank you so much, the two of you, for coming on the show today. I think this was a great conversation. I learned a lot. I hope you guys had a good time too.
Thank you very much.